So are you.
I have a serious show with this guy.
Welcome back to the Combo Couch, ladies and gentlemen. Pasta Jardula here.
And I'm Fiorella.
And Oz is on the ones and twos with the overalls. I just want to let the audience know right now that Fiorella got like wise gal on me right before the show. She goes, I'm going to have a talk with this guy as I'm there. Just to let y'all know the treatment that I get over here as a newspaper guy, fam. Did you
I
know?
never said any of that, but okay.
Did you know I'm a newspaper guy? Fam. Fam. The other day when we had Vanessa Beeley on the morning show, we were talking about how do we get across to these patriots, these conservatives that think that we're Captain America, that we have a right to police the world. And today in the paper, they're even doubling down. It says, how did U.S. intel miss the will to fight? In other words, they're trying to justify what the deep state and intelligence apparatus is doing by saying they just didn't get a grip. They misrepresented or misdiagnosed people in Afghanistan, the forces that we funded for so long, Ukrainians and whatnot, how they missed the will to fight. That if the CIA and the intelligence apparatus, fam, just tries harder and concentrates better, they can do a better job. Not the fact that these assholes are determining what our foreign policy is and going around and making American citizens bear the brunt of what the American government does. No. Wrong. This is what we're dealing with, fam. I'm glad we have Vanessa Beeley on today because we had a little talk about it the other day. She is fire, but this is what they're doing, fam. It's propaganda. And it was Angus King, the independent from the Senate, that was saying they just have to be better with their diagnosis. That's what they're saying.
Fam, people in Europe right now are using fireworks to literally have fires inside their homes because they can't afford to pay the bills, the gas bills. Yeah. That's literally what they're doing. And it's insane that, I mean, you're not going to hear about that in the US, really. You're not going to hear about it because they don't want people to know. But that's what's happening. Meanwhile, the US keeps giving more money, just $40 billion to Ukraine, right? And they keep giving and giving and giving. And they're not looking at the fact that many of our cities in the United States are turning into, I would call them fourth world countries.
Shitholes.
They're not, this is supposed to be the greatest nation in the world, the richest country in the world. And it has a lot of wealth. It's just that wealth isn't distributed in a way that is functioning for the system or functioning at all, period. And so I don't consider them third world countries. I consider a country like this one a fourth world country. It is a fourth world country where you shouldn't have that. You should not have that inequality because you have all the resources. So why is this happening?
Yeah.
So we do have Vanessa Beeley coming on. And, I have to start the show, fam, because I know you have a time constraint and also because we have a lot to talk about. There was a journalist.
Fam.
There was a journalist killed today, right? And Oz brought it to our attention of how important this was. So I will give credit to Oz. And you know what? I mean, the second I found out, I was like, there's no way we cannot talk about this because as journalists, number one, our job is to tell the truth. You put yourself in situations where it's dangerous. You're in danger, right? We do that not because, we're trying to be some sort of ninja or some sort of, a thrill seeker, but because that's sometimes where you have to go to get the story, to get the truth. And this Palestinian journalist was a veteran journalist. She was somebody beloved by the people of Palestine, and she literally got her face shot off by the Israeli army, by snipers.
That's what they're saying, fam. They're saying the Palestinians did it.
Yeah, sure. And we're going to go over all of that because it's bullshit. But this is what Oz brought to our attention. And he said, how many Palestinians need to die before the West realizes that they are supporting a bloody, brutal settler colonial sickening entity known as Israel? And I believe that's been the headline, in the headlines coming in, right? And like, this is, of course, an Al Jazeera journalist. And Al Jazeera, their coverage was, so and so. But this particular journalist was focused on Palestine. And by the way, Al Jazeera has also been attacked before by Israel and by Israeli bombs. They were attacked along with the AP, actually. Yeah, and so it doesn't matter if you're mainstream or not. Yeah. They'll attack you anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead and start going through some of these because, some of the headlines that came out this morning were, you know, were terrible. I mean, we're sad. It's heartbreaking. Samar D. Jarrah wrote, "How many Palestinians need to die?" Like we just said before, they are supporting before the West realizes they are supporting a bloody, brutal, settler, colonialistic entity known as Israel. There is the picture in the photograph, right, of the Palestinian journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, who was shot dead by an Israeli sniper. And this just happened recently too. The Palestinian child was shot. Mohammed al-Dura was shot dead by Israeli sniper in September of 2000. But there was another shooting recently of another kid. And by the way, when they shot her, they also shot another journalist who was injured and taken to the hospital. So they didn't just shoot her by accident. Why would Palestinians shoot other Palestinian journalists? It doesn't make any sense what they're saying. Mm-hmm. So Misty posted this, right? Because this is why, again, we come to the full circle of why in this very moment journalism is so important. And what's happening with Julian Assange, where Priti Patel is going to basically sign to extradite him, because that's basically what's going to happen, even though he's Australian, and England is now, in this decision-making process. And it's just absolute clownery that that's happening, but that's where we're at. And, she said journalism is not a crime, because that's what's one of the things that Julian said. Julian said journalism is not a crime, war crimes are. But now we're in an era, Pasta, and I know you can agree with me, where journalists are being treated as criminals. We're being treated as potential targets just for not agreeing with the current state of narrative.
Yeah, and it really is a shame, because I think a lot of people too, the state of the American left, the way they kind of look at us like, oh my God, you just care about one white dude who's a political prisoner. No, he is the one who opened up the door and pulled the curtain back on the empire. He's actually showing the inherent racism that we have from the empire and whatnot. He represents the freedom of the press. And once they can do that to him for exposing what they're doing, they can do it to any one of us. And they are being treated as criminals. You know this, fam. You and Johnny were on the ground with zip ties around your wrist. You tried to get into the area of Echo Park to go cover stuff. You know how they can be. They can detain you. They can push you down, especially if you're not part of their protected journalism, right? Like they let their protected propagandist get whatever they want to grab, what's essential to keeping their story going. But the reason why we are being treated like criminals, and this is the citizen journalists out there who are taking one, and people like this lovely Al Jazeera reporter who got shot, is because they don't want the truth exposed. They don't want anybody seeing what the empire is doing and the empire's friends. And that is why they are actually criminalizing the freedom of the press.
And I really do love what this tweet says. By no reward, no risk. Potentially 175 years in prison for reporting U.S. war crimes, incarcerated without trial, funds and bank accounts frozen. Don't forget that the funds and bank accounts were frozen. Shot dead.
Yeah.
The potential cost of true journalism in 2022. That's the cost of journalism right now. Any one of us. Do you think that it doesn't frighten us to think that we could be in an area that's potentially somebody could come in and shoot any one of us, right? When we're covering elections somewhere, or when, like you're in a war zone, essentially like we're in a country that is, antagonistic to the empire. Does that thought not cross your mind? Of course it crosses our mind, of course, but you have to go in spite of that, right? That's what you do.
By the way, Vanessa's here if you want to bring her in for the second.
Vanessa, hi.
You're talking about journalists who put their lives on the line, journalists who put themselves in dangerous areas, and Vanessa Beeley just popped right in. So
that was just meant to be. Vanessa, we were talking about Shireen, and it's really, heartbreaking. And you have been one of the people that has been on the ground in a country like Syria, right? Where you were embedded in front of this conflict, and in front of a country that the American people were made to hate. And in spite of that, you continue doing this work. People like you, people like Eva Bartlett, both of you are extremely courageous, and I really do appreciate what you do. So welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me on a very sad day, the loss of Shireen Abu Akleh.
Yes.
The Zionist entity doing what the Zionist entity does, which is cold-blooded murder.
Yeah, and then they went and bombed Syria, right? Which is something you tweeted this morning.
Yeah.
They gotta have dessert, right? There's some dessert for the Israelis. It's ridiculous. They finish their meal and then they go have dessert. That's what it almost seems like.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned my time in Syria, but also I guess a lot of people don't know that in 2012, Eva and I were separately in Gaza when the Israelis began their 2-week aggression in November 2012. And when people try to excuse the violence of the Zionist entity, when you come face to face with it in Gaza, which is effectively an open air prison under siege by Israel, have you got good connection, by the way?
We don't have the greatest connection with you. You're fading a little bit in and out too as well.
Yeah.
And if you can plug in, just pull your headset out, put it back in. There's a little buzz there too as well.
Okay.
It's okay.
Well, you do that. I'm just, Oz, if you could just go to 11 so we remind the audience of what happened. Shireen Abu Akleh, an Al Jazeera reporter, was killed by Israeli gunfire. And she was shot in the head while she was on assignment in Jenin in the occupied West Bank. I'm just going to point this part out. She was a longtime TV correspondent for Al Jazeera Arabic, and she was there covering the raids in Jenin. And also, just so you guys know, she was rushed to the hospital and she was declared dead shortly after. But if we're going to go through some of this stuff, but they couldn't even get to her until they stopped firing because they kept firing. So, they couldn't really get to physically move her. And she was wearing a press vest and was standing with other journalists when she was killed. Another Al Jazeera journalist was there. His name is Ali Al-Samoudi. He was also wounded by a bullet in the scene. He's in stable condition. And they confirmed, of course, that she was shot in the head. And the Al Jazeera has fully condemned, of course, this whole thing, right? But it's really Israel's denying it, right? Israel's saying that it was Palestinian terrorists who killed this journalist, and it's obviously ridiculous what they're saying. And Al-Salmoudi, who was with her, said that they were going to film the Israeli army operation, and suddenly they were shot without them asking them to leave or stop filming. So they were just shot. There was no warning of any kind. And the first bullet hit him. The second bullet hit Shireen. There was no Palestinian military resistance at all at the scene, and that is a witness testimony. And so there had been no confrontations there between Palestinian fighters and the Israeli army. So she was clearly targeted, and anybody saying otherwise is obviously lying at this point. It was also on video, and again they'd reiterate that they were all wearing vests, that they were all wearing helmets, and there are more details that are going to continue emerging. But I wanted to highlight Al Jazeera's reporting because this has been happening a lot. They countlessly shoot people, children, women, and she's not the first one to be shot by the Israeli snipers. And so, I just want to highlight that. And Oz, if you can just go to slide 22, we don't have to play the video, but I just want to highlight the tweet, because the Israeli Foreign Ministry is saying that the terrorists heard were heard saying they've hit us, or they've hit one, they've hit a soldier. He's laying on the ground, but no idea if soldier was injured. In Jenin, Palestinian terrorists firing indiscriminately are likely to have hit Al Jazeera journalist Shireen. So that's what they're claiming, the audacity. Vanessa, are you back?
Yeah, I'm back. I'm sorry. I've checked the internet. It all seems to be good, so I don't know why it's lagging so much.
You're good. You're good.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, this is typical both of Israel and Western media to immediately leap to the defense of Israel in an incident like this. But for people to understand the cold-bloodedness of the Zionist entity, I was talking about the time that I had in Gaza in 2012 and 2013. And of course, you mentioned my colleague, Eva Bartlett, who spent considerable time inside Gaza and inside the occupied territories, and who definitely witnessed far more violence than I did firsthand, because she was there, I think, from 2009 onwards. We were actually in Gaza together, although at that time we didn't really know each other in 2012. And, I just want to say a couple of things to kind of, for people that maybe don't understand the extent to which the Zionist entity will kill without any conscience. They don't care. Whoever is representing the other side is completely dehumanized. They're Untermenschen. It's like they're meaningless to them. For example, when you enter Gaza itself, people may not realize this, but you enter from the Egyptian side. So you enter the Rafah border, which is in Egyptian territory. There is a strip of tarmac, really, between the Rafah border and the entry to Gaza. You cannot cross that strip of tarmac by foot. You have to take a bus. Why? Because if you try to cross that strip of tarmac on foot, you will be shot by the Zionist guards that are keeping watch over that entry strip, right? Just to give you an idea. When I entered Gaza in November 2012, I think on the second day I was there, they mowed down, they carried out an incursion in the borders in Khan Yunis in the south of the Gaza Strip. And during this kind of incursion, this military incursion, they killed a 13-year-old boy who was playing football outside his house. They just mowed him down, right? The next day, they fired on a funeral procession and wounded and killed people that were actually attending a funeral. And then I think it was the day later, they just assassinated what they claimed was one of the leaders of Hamas. And the next day, the aggression started. There is no excuse for the actions of this entity. They are cold-blooded. There was another video that was put out that claimed to be from behind the snipers that were taking the shot at Shireen. And when you look at how she was hit, I mean, she was wearing a helmet. She was wearing, a flak jacket, right? A bulletproof vest. Anyone in a war that is abiding by the rules of the Geneva Convention should not take a shot at press, number one. Number two, the fact that she was hit in the head where she was hit, this is a sniper. This is not being caught in crossfire. If you're caught in crossfire, the likelihood is the bullet will hit the jacket or it will hit the helmet that you're wearing, right? This was a shoot to kill incident by an Israeli, by a Zionist sniper.
Yeah. You think they're trying to deter press from going in there because they don't want the truth to get out?
I mean, they've targeted.
My bad. Stupid. Thank you, Captain Obvious over here. Sorry, Vanessa.
I mean, this is part and parcel. And what is really interesting here, this is not just part and parcel of the Zionist strategy to silence any dissenting voices or any dissenting activists. It's also it's the CIA MI6 playbook, right? We're seeing this rolled out in Ukraine. Look at how many journalists and opposition activists and politicians and even official figures who were negotiating peace with Russia have been disappeared, assassinated, tortured, imprisoned, right? Saudi Arabia, the same thing. And Israel is, you know, every country where you have the CIA tentacles, whatever regime they're protecting or whatever entity they're protecting, you will find them disappearing journalists. I mean, in Gaza, how many times has the Shireen Tower been bombed? Again, in 2012, it was bombed. I remember going there after, I can't remember the number of journalists were actually killed in the bombing that night, but they deliberately targeted the media tower in Gaza.
Yeah.
And they always do. Journalists are consistently targeted, right? In these wars in Syria, I don't know, I mean, hundreds of Syrian journalists were killed while trying to cover this war by the terrorist groups that are, again, you know, backed and created and armed and equipped by the US and by the intelligence agencies from the UK and from the US. So as I said, you know, it's not only the front men, it's not only the Zionist entity itself, it's who's behind that and who's covering it up afterwards.
Yeah.
Right?
No, exactly. And they present two different scenarios. You can tell Oz, we can go back and cover the videos at the end, but I just want to show real quick the slide 28, right? Because you can see how the New York Times wrote this headline, right? Breaking news, Al Jazeera said one of its journalists was killed in the West Bank city of Jenin during clashes between Israeli forces and Palestinian gunmen. That's entirely false. That's not what happened. What Al Jazeera actually said is that they condemn the Israel's killing of Shireen Abu Akleh. That's a completely totally different thing that they're saying. But of course, you know, this is why, you know, a lot of journalists live abroad, because that's the kind of media you get here. It's just an absolute travesty. They get away with disinformation while we're called and labeled, you know, disinformation.
Oz, put up that tweet there that Al Jazeera condemns Israelis' killing of Shireen, just so we can show people over there. That's slide number 28. Really quick, guys, because we want to make sure that we show this stuff. That's, you know, yes, that's the one.
And, you know, I obviously Al Jazeera, I'm not, you know, like the biggest fan, but it's a journalist doing their job, a journalist covering, you know, trying to get to the bottom of this, trying to get to the truth, and to be shot, no matter what network you represent. I think, yeah, it's unacceptable, and people should be outraged. Americans should be absolutely outraged. Palestinians don't ever get that coverage. You had a tweet, and I wish I put it, Vanessa, that where you were pointing out, right, that Israelis, you know, shot a journalist and then bombed Syria, but no one gave a fuck because it wasn't Ukraine. And a lot of people started saying that, right? Where are all the flags, the Palestinian flags? Where are all the memorials? Where's all the empathy?
Yeah. I stand with Palestine. Where's it at? You know?
Yeah, exactly. Where are all the Palestinian avatars and the, you know, I mean, it's such selective outrage. And again, this is being orchestrated by the media. You know, if the media were to cover this as it should do and express outrage and demand protests and ask people to go out in the streets as they did for Floyd, for example, then, you know, we would have a totally different reaction. The bombing of Syria is an almost weekly occurrence, by the way. You know, I mean, this isn't anything unusual. They bombed yesterday, And they bombed again this morning. This morning there were casualties. We haven't had confirmation of how many. But you know, as I said, it's lost in the tsunami of information or misinformation about what's going on in Ukraine to elicit sympathy for the newest NATO proxy war in Ukraine, which has basically switched from Syria to Ukraine right now, right?
Right. And let's go ahead and talk about Ukraine. Pasta, did you want to start off with a question?
I did have I have so many questions when Vanessa comes on. Forget about it. And there's a few other things I want to address too as well, because I always go through your Twitter timeline and say, oh, let's talk about that. But you have been reporting on the Azovstal steel mill. You've been at least tweeting about it and talking about it. In your findings, what's really going on there? And are the civilians trapped? I don't know if you can see my air quotes or down below, or are they actually hostages? You know what I'm saying? Are they hostages, or are they citizens seeking shelter? What have you heard, and what's going to happen here?
Well, I mean, you know, we're hearing all the time civilians that have managed to escape from areas that have been under control of, particularly the Azov Nazi brigades, battalions, and the Ida battalions, all of these ultra-nationalist brigades that have been absorbed into the Ukrainian military and kind of whitewashed with the name regiment, you know, as if to cover up their far-right fascist tendencies. And of course, the media is also, having spent some time after 2014 and the US-backed, but also Israeli-backed, UK-backed coup in 2014, and of course the terrible massacre by these battalions in Odessa, in the trade union building, which everyone should remember, and then the 8 years of genocide in Donbass by these Azov battalions and the ultra-nationalist elements inside Ukraine. What we're seeing, of course, is very similar to what we saw in Syria, which is areas that are occupied and defended by these Azov battalions against the Russian forces that are waging a very strategic, a very civilian-conscious war, right? So they're moving very slowly. Of course, in the West, it's being portrayed as they're defeated, but effectively they have a strategy and they're sticking to their tactics, they're sticking to their strategy, which is to eliminate military centers, to capture the biolabs, but to reduce impact on civilian infrastructure and on civilian lives as much as possible. Now, when civilians are leaving areas that have been occupied by the Azov brigades, of course, what they're saying is they were being held as human shields. They were not allowed to leave by the humanitarian corridors that were established by the Russian forces to bring them to safety. If they tried to leave, they were being sniped, they were being shot, they were being detained, etc. And so
to a pole, wrapped around the pole, maybe, you know?
Yeah. This is something else.
It's like, you know, it's good for memes.
But yay, Slava Ukraini, you know? I mean, it's just, people, please need to wake up.
Yeah, no shit.
But in Azovstal, so it's the same thing. That they were effectively being kept as hostages, as human shields. And of course, there are believed to be a number of NATO operatives inside Azovstal that are being protected, and at number of various occasions, there have been attempted rescue missions, particularly of the French military, that apparently were kept secret by Macron leading up to the elections because he didn't want it to affect his election campaign if the French public realized that he had effectively sent senior French military officers to their death in Azovstal and had sent them the message telling them not to surrender. There are reports of Canadian military personnel who have been instrumental in the training of the Azov battalions in Western Ukraine for some time. General Trevor Kadya is allegedly been arrested or been detained, and has been taken to Moscow for questioning, according to some reports. Of course, in my view, none of this is confirmed until we actually sort of see the results of the questioning, etc. But it is very likely that there are NATO personnel underground with the Azov Battalion military.
Yeah, and I believe that they're saying that the Russian army is not going to let them just whittle away. They want them to lay down their weapons and surrender, and therefore exposing, I think, what's been going on underneath Azovstal. But yet the West is saying, you know, the same thing we see with Bojo going to the Ukraine, telling Zelensky, you're not in charge. You're not working out peace deals. We're in charge. It seems, would it be accurate to say that's what's also going on in Azovstal? Have you heard anything similar to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Russians are very conscious of the fact that there's probably an awful lot of secrets below ground in Azovstal, including the potential for one of the most secret biolabs, which is believed to have been run by this Canadian General Trevor Kadia. And so I'm guessing, I mean, the thing is, I can draw similarities between what's happening here and what happened in Syria in many of the kind of siege situations of pockets of terrorist enclaves in East Aleppo and in eastern Ghouta and even in Idlib. The Russians were always very aware that they didn't want to damage evidence effectively, right? In East Aleppo, they allowed NATO military to actually leave during the final liberation. We actually saw them leaving in buses with darkened windows so nobody could actually see their faces. In Eastern Ghouta, very much a similar situation. And of course, these military personnel are used as negotiating chips. So very often people will say, yeah, what happened to all those NATO guys they were talking about? Very often they're brought out and they're used as exchange in return for prisoners that have been taken, for example, in Ukraine by Zelensky's SBU, security forces, etc. And in Syria, a similar thing. So often you'll kind of see them ghost away. You don't hear about them again. But I believe that's because they're used in back-channel negotiations between both sides.
If that's the case, if NATO is so heavily involved in the military, right, the military fight of on behalf of Ukraine, essentially, right, is that not then enough provocation for Russia to say, well, you guys are basically starting a war with us, the West, NATO and the United States are waging war on Russia. And the only thing that is barring any sort of, nuclear act from Russia is the fact that obviously they don't want to start a world war. They don't want a nuclear war, but also, I mean, it's that the fact that Ukraine is used as a proxy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this is what people need to understand. The West and NATO don't give a shit about the Ukrainian people. So all of these people putting Slava Ukraini and putting the Ukrainian flag, you're sustaining the war that is going to be killing the Ukrainian people, right? That's the bottom line, because NATO didn't care about the Syrian rebels. It didn't care about the people in Iraq. It didn't care about the people in Libya. If it did, Libya now would not be a failed state and full of drug trafficking and a terrorist vacuum and people still leaving it en masse, right? NATO is there to destroy everything that stands in its path. So it is using the Ukrainian people as cannon fodder against Russia and supporting the Nazi elements that Russia is going in to cleanse Ukraine of, right? And when I'm speaking to Bulgarian nationals, to Ukrainians inside Ukraine, who, for example, since 2014 refused to be conscripted into those armed forces that were leading the genocide against the Russian speakers in Donetsk and Luhansk, they themselves were being detained and tortured and executed. So Bulgarians were being tortured, detained, and executed because they wouldn't take part in the genocide against Donbass, right? So, you know, instead of being swung by the media into this war, people should stop and think. I mean, one of the most disturbing things I saw in the last couple of days was in Poland, in Warsaw, when the Russian ambassador to Poland, I mean, really, I was in tears yesterday when I saw this. You know, the dignity of the guy who was representing the country that defeated Nazism, lost 27 million people in the war against Nazism. When the representative of that country that effectively saved Poland, Poland that suffered at the hands of the Nazis, went to commemorate the victory against Nazism, he was attacked by fascists calling him a fascist. I mean, what got me was the dignity of the guy and how he responded when the journalist said to him, well, you know, how do you feel about this? What we've thrown at you symbolizes blood. He said, well, it's syrup. He said, yeah, but it symbolizes the blood that Russia is shedding in Ukraine. And he said, no, it's fake. It's syrup, just as the story of the atrocities in Bucha were theater, right? I mean, despite this attack on him, and an attack on human dignity. I mean, this is the thing. This is what NATO is doing to us. It's effectively turning us into monsters, and we have to really be aware of this, of what we're supporting here. I mean, there are hundreds of reports, in-depth reports, of the fact that it is NATO member states that have been training the Nazi battalions in Lviv, in Western Ukraine, for years. Stop supporting Nazism. You know, it exists. And when you talk about it being a minority, this is another argument that people use. Yeah, but it's not a majority. Al-Qaeda is not a majority in Syria. But when Al-Qaeda is in control of an area, say like Idlib, where, yeah, it's a minority, it takes control because it's the most brutal, savage, racist, elitist.
Oh, damn it. I lost you. You can just come back in. We'll have her back on.
He was getting fan. All right, continue with the folder. Tell Oz what slide to go to.
Oh, no.
Back in.
I mean,
she's gonna have to exit out and come back in.
Okay.
Yeah. So good.
No, she's right. 100% right.
That was so good.
It's guys, so since we're talking about all of this, because this has to do with everything, right? War. We're talking about war. I'm going to go and show a couple of videos that about the journalist Shireen. So let's go ahead and play this video. This one is, let's see. Yes, 34. And yeah, this is the video of them going to her at this point. So I just want to point out that they couldn't really get to her because they were still firing. So they had to wait. And because these people don't want to die either, right? So they have to wait to actually go in there to get to her. and they found the area between her helmet and her face to hit her. I mean, there's no argument here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they've been guilty of this before, fam. You know, they said that like, oh, this person should have been killed. That shouldn't be killed. And then they've had high-ranking Israeli officers say there wasn't one mistake, not one person that was targeted, that wasn't targeted, got a bullet. You know what I'm saying? In other words, everybody that they targeted got a bullet. So they knew what they were doing consciously, and they know this. He said every bullet that was fired that hit somebody was meant to hit somebody. Yeah. End of story. Vanessa's back. And you know, do you remember where you were? Because we've had to say this before. We've had to go, okay, disclaimer. Not everybody in the Ukraine is a Nazi, but, and you were kind of going into that whole thing and what you experienced in Syria when Al-Qaeda takes part of Idlib. Please continue.
Yeah, I mean, the point I was making is, you know, when you talk about the Nazi elements being a minority inside Ukraine, because they are power multiplied by NATO member states, they are being supplied with some of the most sophisticated weapons that exist. They are being financed. They are being aided and abetted by media, of course, which are completely now sort of disappearing their Nazi links, and flipping the narrative. Like, you know, these are just nationalists fighting the real fascists, the real Nazis, which are the Russians.
Well, calling the trucker convoy Nazis.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Spot on. And, you know, when I compare it to, for example, the Al-Qaeda dominance in Idlib, of course, Al-Qaeda is not the majority force, but it's the strongest force because it's the most brutal, it's the most savage, it rules through reprisals, execution, imprisonment, torture, extortion, right? So it economically enslaves the people who are in the areas that it's occupying. And of course, it is the best funded, the best armed, the best equipped of all the armed groups. So therefore, it takes dominance naturally, even though in numbers, it may be the minority, right? And so this is what people need to understand. If the Azov battalion are in control of an area, it doesn't necessarily mean they're in control but by virtue of being a majority in that area. They're in control by virtue of being the nastiest, most savage, most brutal, most terrifying organization in that area. And if people speak out, they're shot. If people try to leave, they're shot. Family members are taken, potentially tortured, raped. You've seen the what is it? The gaffer tape tying of people to trees and lampposts and beating and the humiliation, right? You know, so they don't need to be the majority to rule through fear. This is what people need to understand. And for sure, you know, nobody is saying all Ukrainians are Nazis. What we're saying is NATO member states are power multiplying and are enabling and facilitating the increase, the expansionism of the Nazi and fascist elements inside Ukraine. And that's what they've always done since the end of the Second World War. Watch Ukraine on Fire by Oliver Stone to fully understand how the CIA and the MI6 weaponized the Nazis, and also how the Zionist cults that were formed inside Ukraine worked alongside those Nazi elements, with the common enemy being formerly the Soviet Union and now, of course, Russia. And that's another thing that people need to kind of get their head around, because a lot of people kind of go, yeah, but how can Zelensky be empowering Nazi battalions? He's Jewish, right? Mm-hmm. You know, guys, go back to the 1920s when the then president of the Ukrainian Republic between 1918 and 1921, Simon Peliura, was working with Jabotinsky, who established, like, for example, the Irgun terrorist group and a number of the youth groups that were involved, Zionist youth groups that were involved in the Nakba in 1948, the ethnic cleansing in Palestine. But Jabotinsky was allowed by Palura to set up Jewish military, Jewish security, Jewish police forces. So they were given a degree of independence. Now, this despite the fact that according to Zionist records, Palura was responsible for the deaths of more than 50,000 Jews. So here you have one of the founders of the Zionist cult movement or ultra-Orthodox Jewish movements working hand in glove with someone that had massacred Jews, right, carried out some of the worst pogroms and prior to the Second World War, on the basis they could maintain their independence unless they were met, or Ukraine was met with the threat of invasion by the Soviet Union. So that's when then they would be coming together to defend Ukraine against the threat of communism and the Soviet Union, right? So, this is not something, go back through history. This collaboration is not something new, and it's not something that should be unexpected, right? Because when you look at it from a secular perspective, they suit each other. Ultra-nationalist, elitist, racist. Right. The Russians now are the Untermenschen. The Russians now are the dehumanized, just as Palestinians are dehumanized by Zionist cults. And in Ukraine, even prior to the formation of Zionism itself, there were ultra-Orthodox Jewish cults formed in Ukraine prior to the formation of the Zionist movement itself. Ukraine is Professor David Miller actually said to me, Ukraine is a de facto Zionist state. Mm-hmm. Odessa were the gates of Zion, right? Golda Meir came from Kiev. 5 Israeli prime ministers, presidents, etc., came from Ukraine. And look at Kolomoisky.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Holds an Israeli passport, put Zelensky in power. He funds the Azov battalion. Yep. He founded the Chabad Lubavitch movement in Ukraine. So this guy is involved in MH17, right?
Yeah.
So, it's the history. Look at your history, guys. It's very, very, very important to understand this, and don't be swayed by what the media is telling you to support, because they're covering up history. Seriously, when I do like a scroll through, my Google feed, it's rubbish.
Yeah.
They're not here to inform you.
They're rewriting history, though. That's the problem, right? They're rewriting history now. But like, as you said, they're talking about the past, and they're saying that, oh no, the Russians were not responsible. The Soviet Union was not responsible for the defeat of Nazism, and they only lost that many people because they're, these vile people who just want to send their own troops to die because they love seeing them die. That's how they're rewriting everything. And they're saying, oh, they only, they made a pact in 1939. They made a pact with Hitler. And it's like, well, what about everybody else that made like a treaty and a pact of peace with Hitler? They're rewriting everything. So we live in a topsy-turvy world that when someone hears what you just said, Vanessa, even though you're 100% right, they're going to say, oh, she's complete anti-Semite. That's what they're gonna say, because it's just, we live in a topsy-turvy world where there are more anti-war Republicans than there are anti-war Democrats. Yeah. I don't even know if there is one. Actually, I don't think there is one.
Not one Democrat signed on for that proxy war. That 40 billion, whatnot. And, I had a question for you, Vanessa, but I have a couple of videos because, it's funny when you're talking about people need to wake up, and up is down and left is right. Well, the 40 billion that was given, because they only asked for 33 billion, but, a lot of the pro-war Democrats and the pro-war Republicans, They didn't think it was enough, so they gave 40 billion. But here's somebody in our Congress, and this is just blow your mind, saying that we shouldn't give that money to Ukraine. And it's just, it makes my head explode. Go ahead.
Thank you. I rise in opposition to the Ukrainian supplemental bill. $40 billion. But there's no baby formula for American mothers and babies. An unknown amount of money to the CIA in the Ukraine supplemental bill, but there's no formula for American babies and mothers. $54 million in COVID spending in Ukraine, but there's no formula for American babies and mothers. $900 million for nonprofits and organizations in Ukraine, but there's no formula for American babies and mothers. $8.7 billion for economic support and funding in Ukraine, but there's no formula for American mothers and babies. If this is about claiming that it's about saving lives, let's be real, then we would care about war-torn countries like Ethiopia. So that's a bunch of hypocrisy because I never hear Ethiopia brought up here. Completely ignoring our own border crisis, our own baby formula crisis, and brutal inflation, skyrocketing gas prices that no one can afford, but $40 billion for Ukraine? Stop funding regime change and money laundering scams and U.S. politician cover-ups of their crimes in countries like Ukraine. The American people do not support paying for constant U.S. involvement in foreign affairs while our own government fails our own country. Let me remind everyone here, we swore an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States of America and our borders. We should be paying attention to our country right now. I yield back. Thank you.
I mean, that was Marjorie Taylor Greene, ladies and gentlemen. Let me repeat that.
Christ.
That was Marjorie Taylor Greene. She brought up NGOs. She called out the CIA. She mentioned Ethiopia. I kept on waiting, like, all right, when's she going to say something stupid? When's she going to say something stupid? That's Marjorie Taylor Greene, ladies and gentlemen. Not the squad. Nobody from the squad. I mean, and really quickly, before we get your opinion, Vanessa, here's the response from the House Democrats. Listen to this really quickly. And then please give me your take on it.
Here's a formula for the destruction of democracy, repeating Putin's propaganda and disinformation and appeasing imperialist assaults on sovereign nations.
What's up? It didn't work.
Oh, we didn't hear it.
Here's a formula for the destruction of democracy, repeating Putin's propaganda and disinformation and appeasing imperialist assaults on sovereign nations.
So that was it. Once again, it's Putin. You a Putin apologist. They won't stop with the Russiagate stuff. That was Marjorie Taylor Greene that brought up Ethiopia. Like we had to rely on. I don't even know what to do right now. I don't know. I mean, please, Vanessa, your thoughts.
Well, I mean, it's this whole thing about a sovereign nation. That Ukraine is not a sovereign nation.
Right.
It's completely occupied by NATO, right? One. Two, the US and the UK and the entire NATO member state coalition has spent its entire existence invading and destroying and devastating and gang raping and plundering sovereign nations, right? I mean, it's like, I just don't know what to say to them anymore. 40 billion into Ukraine. Where is 40 billion going? Where are the accounts? How do we know where this money is going? What's it being used for, right? I mean, you know, Russia has already said whatever is damaged inside Ukraine, it will rebuild. You know, Russia is not America. it doesn't just bomb the shit out of Raqqa, or like America did in Raqqa, in Mosul, in Iraq in 2003, right? Yemen, Libya, like wherever America puts its hand, yeah, it's devastated. But Russia is not America. And this is the problem. I think people in the West have lived so long under, one, the bullshit that is fed to them by Western media, but two, under the policies of an American barbaric regime. And when I talk about America, you know, I immediately put the UK in the same basket. We're just a little bit politer about it, but we're doing effectively the same thing. And, you know, as I said, I come back to the 40 billion, but I also come back to the fact that, what was his name? Chuck Schumer, who was talking about grabbing the Russian oligarch assets to fund the war in Ukraine. So it's like, I mean, this is the ultimate in craziness, right? Like,
yeah.
Let's freeze the assets of Russia, and let's use like 300 billion of those assets if we need it to send whatever into Ukraine, where Russia is effectively trying to protect the Russian-speaking civilians in Donetsk and Lugansk, because they were on the verge of an out-and-out military invasion of that area, which would have ended in the ethnic cleansing, the massacre of these people. Right? I mean, it's just, I don't know what it takes for people to actually understand what is going on and what the repercussions are going to be for them. You know, and as much as the American regime and the British regime blame everything on Putin, no, they are doing this to the Ukrainian people. They are doing this to the EU. They are doing it to their own population in America. They are doing this to Syria, by the way. I mean, I saw an article come out in the last couple of days about food insecurity and starvation in Syria because Russia invaded Ukraine. No, like Syria is starving because America has waged an 11-year regime change war against Syria, has imposed some of the most savage sanctions, unprecedented sanctions against Syria, is occupying Syrian oil, is burning Syrian agricultural produce, and is trading the rest through its proxies, which includes the Kurdish Contras and ISIS and Al-Qaeda. So that's why Syria is starving, not because Putin invaded Ukraine. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Vanessa, one question I wanted to get to was the fact that Europe is actually doing this to itself, right? We're about to witness the collapse of the economic collapse of the EU. Right now, the market is crashing here in the United States. I mean, inflation is at an all-time high. What Marjorie Taylor Greene was saying is 100% true. It is bad, but it's going to get worse. But it's definitely going to be even worse in Europe because they're so dependent on that gas. And people are already using fireworks and building fires inside their homes because they can't afford to pay the gas bill. How bad do you think it's going to get in the EU, considering that, you know, they're pretty much destroying their own economy to quote unquote support? And do you think that is by design? Do you think that is intentional?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, part of this war is the American and UK war against Germany, you know, which never really ended after World War II. But it was also to prevent any kind of autonomy in the EU and to ensure that US unipolarity continues, and that their trade and economic supremacy continues, and that the EU doesn't step out of line, doesn't pivot towards Russia, which of course it was doing, whether sort of clandestinely or whether overtly. Certainly under Merkel, Germany was pivoting towards Russia, despite the fact that it is still militarily occupied by both the US and the UK, right? Now under Scholz, of course, it's coming way more into line with the United States. But yeah, I mean, I think Biden in one of his speeches made the point that this is going to impact on the EU. He didn't look particularly unhappy about that. So, you know, when people talk about how this war is being weaponized to bring in the whole Great Reset and continue with the WEF agenda, I agree on one aspect of that. Yes, the war has been provoked by a Western-centric Great Reset cabal in order to continue the pinning down of the EU and the UK working class, of course. I mean, this isn't something new. France has been battling Macron's austerity measures, and then, of course, some of the most draconian COVID measures in the EU. And now Macron has been re-elected, right? Because they want him to maintain the pressure on the working classes in France that he started. I mean, they did start way before Macron's arrival on the scene, but he arrived at the time that they knew they were going to start the war against the working class. And that's what we're seeing now at the moment, which is being enabled and facilitated, of course, by the backlash from the war in Ukraine, which was inevitable. And America and the most powerful NATO member states knew that this was going to be the repercussion. They knew it.
Yeah.
Just a follow-up, Vanessa, on this. So do you think that Putin is actually opposed to this global surveillance state that, you know, people like Klaus Schwab and a lot of these oligarchs want to bring in, that you know, NATO and the West is pushing? Do you think he's actually opposed to it? Because there's always that debate that, oh, you know, Putin did attend the World Economic Forum, that this could just be theater, is what many people say.
COVID policies too, fam, right?
I'm sorry, COVID policies as well.
They're like, whoa, he's part of it.
Yeah. I mean, I've been privileged to be part of a number of discussions on this. By no means do I put Russia up on a pedestal or Putin up on a pedestal, nor do I put China up on a pedestal, but I do believe there is a huge ideological difference between East and West, and I don't think that can be ignored. So I think what you are probably seeing is a split between East and West, and a realignment. For example, the countries that are kind of aligning themselves behind Russia and China, because of course China is well aware if Russia falls in this or loses this war in Ukraine, then China is very likely next, right? So China is at the moment behind Russia. I have certain reservations about China. I mean, China, for example, is heavily involved in the war in Yemen. It's supplying drones and weapons to the Saudi coalition. Both Russia and China have upheld the UN criminal resolution, UN 2216, which has enabled the blockade of 23 million genocide in Yemen since 2015. So I have reservations on that side. I do believe that ideologically Russia is opposed to many of the Western policies as part of the WEF Great Reset agenda. They're opposed to transhumanism, eugenicism. They're opposed to, the whole LGBT transgender movements, etc. I mean, Putin spoke about this about 5 years ago at Valdai, when he spoke about the pedophilia in the West, the Satanism. He laid it out there, right? So for me, I have, I'm not saying that what we end up is going to be better, but it will be different, and it will certainly be multipolar. What I see it as is, whereas the West will imprint its agenda for humanity on every single nation, I don't see that happening with Russia and China. What I see happening with Russia and China is an opportunity for trade and economic expansionism. But with that trade and economic expansionism will come the building of infrastructure, like the Belt and Road Initiative, for example, the high-speed rail links, and so on. So I think it's a different version of the Western-centric WEF Davos agenda for humanity. And for me, I guess I'm a little bit like, I want to see the end of US supremacy and the unipolar world. What comes after that, I don't think anyone can draw that conclusion right now. You know, I think it's just a case of we're in a kind of World War III situation, and those that are claiming, you know, the war is just theater, it's orchestrated, it's being engineered because they're all in it together to bring in the Great Reset. No, I don't believe that.
I don't either.
I don't believe that. For me, that's offensive to the civilians in Donbass, in Lugansk and Donetsk that have lost their lives, 14,000 in the last 8 years. It's offensive to, you know, the existential war that Russia is fighting right now. It is fighting for its traditional values. It's fighting the war that never ended at the end of World War II. And that I do believe in. So I believe in the conservatism and traditionalism of the Russian nation and what it's defending right now, because I've seen that in Syria. You know, I've seen Syria step in and stand shoulder to shoulder with the Syrian Christian Orthodox communities here against Western-backed terrorism and extremism that would see them completely wiped out. You know, while the UK and the US were claiming we must protect Christians in the Middle East, they were having them massacred. They were desecrating their churches. They were desecrating their holy ground through their proxies, right?
Northern Iraq too, right? I mean,
absolutely. Yemen, you know, I mean, all of these, yeah.
Fam, do you have any more questions about Ukraine? Because I do want to pivot really quick to Lebanon before Vanessa leaves.
Oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you, Fam. Vanessa, and by the way, hi, Mom. Vanessa's on again. My mom has become a big fan, and I was like reading a lot of, you know, comments in the thread. Everybody loves Vanessa Beeley, especially our audience, and we appreciate you coming on. I haven't seen any dogs yet, but if you want to show a dog, don't ever forget. And first,
I've sent them all to bed.
All right, we won't wake them up then and stuff. You know, Gomez says hi, by the way. You've tweeted before showing these massive support, these rallies and support in Lebanon from Hezbollah, right? And a lot of Americans, they think that Hezbollah and Hamas are the same thing. They don't understand the difference between the two. Can you provide some context to why you think this movement maybe in Lebanon with Hezbollah might kind of take hold? I mean, obviously the Lebanese constitution demands that it has equal representation around, but it seems like the majority of the people are kind of coalescing behind Hezbollah. Can you give a little context to what you're seeing and what we might see in the near future when it comes to a government in Lebanon?
Well, I mean, you know, the fact is that, I mean, Lebanon is in economic freefall and has been for some time since the Beirut port explosion. Of course, it's been plummeting. It's not just in freefall, it's economically destroyed. I struggle to say it's a failed state, but it's not far off. And of course, what has happened is that Hezbollah, as rather than as a military unit, as a political unit, has stepped up to the plate. And for example, it was Hezbollah that during the fuel shortages was negotiating the fuel supply from Iran. That, of course, then led to the American ambassador in Lebanon stepping in and partially lifting the sanctions on Syria to allow reparations to the pipeline from Egypt through Jordan, through Syria and into Lebanon to counter the growing Hezbollah influence. It's also worth noting that the British government and various MI6 agencies and contractors have for some time been infiltrating Lebanese security, army, military, governmental institutions, and even the Palestinian refugee camps in order to push back against the Hezbollah influence. And that we're seeing, I wrote about that fairly recently, because we're seeing, of course, the same sort of blueprint turning up in Ukraine as we saw in Syria and in Lebanon. And now there are initiatives proposed in Yemen also. And I'm talking about the white helmets, the kind of civil defense construct used to infiltrate society, to work, to be embedded with the various fanatic groups, whether it's Nazis in Ukraine or Al-Qaeda inside Syria. And so the scramble by particularly France, because France historically competed with Britain for influence in the region, trying to push back against the Hezbollah influence, because at the end of the day, Hezbollah is not only representing the Palestinian cause in the region. Of course, it stepped into Syria and was very effective in the war against terrorism there. Without actually, the difference with Hezbollah is that it hasn't laid claim to any territory in Syria. It literally saw it as a principle that it had to defend its ally in the region, when I'm talking ally against Israel, against Western-backed terrorism. So Hezbollah's response also to some of the orchestrated and engineered uprisings, for example, in Lebanon, has always been very measured. It's always stood back. It's always advocated against any kind of violent reprisals, despite a great deal of provocation against Hezbollah affiliates, for example, inside Lebanon. It's always taken a very, very back foot stance, if you like, and warned people against being whipped up into any kind of frenzy or any kind of sectarian violence. I mean, the best person I would recommend for you to speak to about this is Marwa Osman, because she's obviously there on the ground and is far more informed about this than I am from on the ground. But, you know, Hezbollah has proven itself to be not only for its own sector, but for the Lebanese people. And it has maintained a steady supply of help and aid, even through the banking sector, through the education sector, you know, a very sort of socialist policy in a way. And because it has refused to be pulled into the orchestrated violence and sectarian violence and attacks, people have grown to respect it as a political institution, and that is despite all of the interference from outside to try and discredit it, to try and turn people against it.
Thank you.
And my last question, I guess, is, since we've been going a while, for me is, where do you think this conflict, going back to, you know, Russia and Ukraine, and you could even talk about other conflicts, but particularly, where do you think this ends, considering the fact that clearly Russia on a tactical and military level is winning? They have the upper hand. In fact, we spoke to Gonzalo on Monday, and he said it's over, it's done. There's no, I mean, that's it. Like, Russia, you know, has effectively won. I don't see this ending with any sort of treaty where Ukraine doesn't agree with some sort of security to not join NATO, right? And when Russia doesn't take what it takes, because they're going to ensure that this doesn't happen again. So I don't see it ending in a very, like, oh, hey, let's sit down and have this accord. Because I just don't see Ukraine cooperating. They keep asking the United States for more money. The United States keeps giving them more money. NATO continues to push this whole other narrative. So where do you think this ends? And do you think it could potentially explode into a bigger conflict?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a very, sadly, a very strong potential for it to explode into a bigger conflict, because this is kind of the end game. If Russia wins this war and achieves its agenda in Ukraine, creates a buffer zone, brings Ukraine to the negotiations table, they accept that they will never join NATO or the EU, that NATO will no longer have its military installations inside Ukraine, et cetera, et cetera. And, they still have to continue with the denazification. I still think we've got a long way to go. I agree that militarily Russia is winning the war, but, there is potential for NATO to trigger conflict in other areas surrounding Ukraine also. I mean, there's Transnistria, but there's also the ongoing problems in Azerbaijan. And, what I'm seeing at the moment is a kind of chaos strategy being brought in, right? And it's like conflicts are just being triggered everywhere. Even, obviously, I mean, there's Taiwan also, right? So China is still having been targeted through the Hong Kong revolutions, the whole weaponization of the Uyghurs in the Xinjiang province, etc., which obviously was leaning onto the BRI initiative. And just for people to be aware, there's 25,000 Uyghur extremists fighting in Idlib in Syria. So I agree that, Russia will win the war in Ukraine. That is inevitable. Is the war going to end there? No, I don't think so.
Yeah. I think it was also, too, when you're talking about the Uyghurs, was it Operation Cyclone, where Jimmy Carter's CIA was funding Uyghurs to bring Stinger missiles into Afghanistan to give to the Mujahideen.
Yeah.
So these are the most fanatical out there. This is a problem that we actually poured gasoline on the fire. So when you hear American politician going, "Oh my God, the Uyghurs," it's like, learn your history.
Yeah, exactly.
Learn your history. Vanessa, Beeley, thank you so much for joining us today. Is there anywhere else people can find some of your information other than your Twitter that I always stalk every day because it's amazing?
Oh, thank you. Thank you guys as well. I love what you do, and thanks for having me on again. No, they can go to my Substack. My Patreon is still hanging on in there, but I'll be kind of doing more at Substack now.
Yeah.
Awesome. And she also has a great Telegram channel.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody
forgot about that.
should follow.
Fam's piping up that
I'm like,
Telegram channel. I'm getting ready to get the plug pulled on them, but who knows? Elon Musk might save us and save our
Oh, of course, yes.
Oh, God. Don't.
No, right? Another time, another conversation. We love you, Vanessa. Say hi to the
Thank
dog.
you so much, Vanessa.
Take care, guys.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
I know I'm going to get a Zoom call one day, right? And Fam's going to be in Syria hanging out with Vanessa Beeley. I'm like, what are you doing? What are you doing? That's going to happen, ladies and gentlemen. You can count on it, Fam.
Oh yes. It'll definitely happen. That's like my goal, is to go to all these places. I mean, that's kind of where I want to be. But
speaking about places to go, Fam, it's where I want to be, right in Colombia. Not smoking on some trees, but watching the vote. Ladies and gentlemen, Fam and I are still on our way to Colombia before she gets off to Moscow. So please hit us up at thegivesendgo.com/support the combo couch. Get in there. Help us out, ladies and gentlemen. Remember, we have no corporate funding behind us. None of the big boys are giving us any shkarol. Whatever you believe, Fam's not getting paid in vodka. So please help us out, guys. We need your help. Whatever you can do, $1, $2, $5, $20, $500, whatever you can do is greatly appreciated on the couch, Fam.
it's always appreciated, guys. Let me just finish up right now. There's a video I did want to show. before we finish, so we can just say bye to this journalist. And this is slide 26.
لن أنسى أبداً حجم الدمار ولا الشعور بأن الموت كان أحياناً على مسافة قريبة. لم نكن نرى بيوتنا. كنا نحمل الكاميرات ونتنقل عبر الحواجز العسكرية والطرق الوعرة. كنا نبيت في مستشفيات أو عند أناس لم نعرفهم. ورغم الخطر كنا نصر على مواصلة العمل. كان ذلك خلال عام 2002 حين تعرضت الضفة الغربية لاجتياح لم تعهده منذ احتلال عام 67. في اللحظات الصعبة تغلبت على الخوف، فقد اخترت الصحافة كي أكون قريبة من الإنسان. ليس سهلا ربما أن أغير الواقع، لكنني على الأقل كنت قادرة على إيصال ذلك الصوت إلى العالم. أنا شيرين أكله.
It sucks, fam. That it's awful. Oz, would you like to say anything? Because I think you had a strong emotional connection to this particular journalist, and you said something before the show when it comes to Shireen.
You know, I don't even have the words anymore. It's all started with me, with Rachel Corrie being bulldozed by the Israelis. And from then on out, it's just gotten worse and worse and worse. As we, the United States, keep supporting and backing these terrorist nations like Israel and Saudi Arabia and them themselves, the United States, I believe truly, and it breaks my heart, that we are part of the axis of evil. And that's all I can say. I think that sums it up for me.
Yeah. And now we're continuing to back evil, right? As Vanessa pointed out, throughout the whole time she was here, we've funded, created a lot of these extremists, and now we're doing the same thing in Ukraine. And it hasn't changed. It's just a different region. The playbook's the same. So, and we continue to do this. We are a death cult. We are a war machine, and the machine is always fed before the American people are. And the machine lives off of death, off of manufactured hatred. And it doesn't matter who wins with this machine, because at the end we really all lose. The only ones that win are the oligarchs. And so really it's time for the American people, especially those so-called progressives, to pay attention to foreign policy. Because if your squat members can be out-lefted by Marjorie Taylor Greene, you're doing something wrong. You're doing something wrong. Like if the left is like pro-war, then forget about left and right at this point. Because if that's the left, I'm an anti-imperialist before I am anything else. Yeah. So that's the end of that discussion.
I would have I don't even want to speculate or imagine, because there's not one squad member, fam, not one squad member. And after Nina Turner's tweet yesterday about her saying Donald Trump should have his Twitter account suspended and taken away and stuff, because, I have to say to the squad, Nina, and anybody, scene, it's over. You're done. Completely done. You're nothing but a bunch of phony fakes that support the American empire. You've proved it once and for all. If Marjorie Taylor Greene is going to go out there and out-humanize you, screw left, right, pop, be more of a human being, while you're sending billions off for a CIA proxy war that's going to kill people. And it's like Vanessa said, you don't give a damn about the people of Ukraine. You never have. It's like that little cartoon we play with the crow. They don't give a damn. All they care is their geopolitics, their military budget. That's it. These people are vultures, and the squad supported it. Done. Over. Seen. Thank you. Trey Wright says, fuck Israel. Thank you for the Super 8 contribution. It's always appreciated on the couch. Glory Jones, who just graduated Congratulations,
Hey.
G. Jones. No cap. We are proud of you. Way Western MSN, mainstream
She was
media,
waiting for that.
is trying to whitewash the murder of Shireen is like when the U.S. frames police murdering of unarmed teens as officer-involved shootings.
Yep.
How was the officer involved, sir? How were the Zionist occupation forces involved, huh? Yes.
That's because they trained them, Glory.
That's right.
I mean,
Straight fire, sure. Those fucks literally blew her whole face off. R.I.P. Much love, Vanessa. Fuck Israel and free Palestine from the river to the sea. El Brillante, thank you so much for the Super 8 contribution. As always, appreciated on the couch. Greg Hossman, thank you for the Super 8 contribution. It's always appreciated on the couch. Black in the Empire, we love you, Daryl. What a world. Black in the Empire also says, Fee loves it when pasta sings, so I'll sing at the very end for you. Game.film. So I was just fucking sighed. I wish the combo couch got more respect. Y'all cover so many topics and no one covers elections like y'all. Keep up the great work. Thank you, Game.film. And we will continue to cover the elections. I'm working on an article. Wyatt won't let me release it yet. He says it still needs work about what 2000 Mules was all about. It's not a movie review. It's a call to action because Dinesh D'Souza showed up with Donald Trump at a freaking goddamn rally now. They're promoting this shit and they're trying to split the people even more. They're trying to make it a partisan issue. When Fia said before, from everything we learned out there, elections, when it comes to our election system, it's not a bipartisan issue. It's not a partisan issue. It's a non-partisan issue. And for Dinesh D'Souza to promote the security states and their tactics, when even people like Anomaly, who haven't watched the movie, who said, yeah, that's some scary shit, and it's a handout to the security state, okay, and trying to be partisan, and to think, fam, this donkey thinks that the Republicans weren't involved, that it was the Democrats doing it. You're smoking some glue. There were no coattails for Joe Biden and the Democrats. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that Donald Trump lost the election, but all the Republicans won? You think the Republicans aren't involved? You're sniffing glue. You were lazy with that movie, and we're going to have a call to action, and we're going to talk about it. The security state is not fucking getting involved. We don't need cameras on drop boxes. We need to eliminate drop boxes. End of story. They don't have them in Honduras. They don't have them in Nicaragua. They don't have them in Peru. They don't have them in France. And they don't have them in Colombia, where we're going. Just ridiculous. Diane Morris, thank you for the Super 8 contribution. Is always appreciated on the couch. That's it for today. 100 people got in the door on the Rockfin. We had almost 400 people on the YouTube while we were being suppressed as can be. And we wish we did get more love and whatnot. But listen, we know what we're doing. We're doing the right thing because you guys come and show us every day. You give us the means necessary to get the boots on the ground. And we're going to do that right now in Colombia. And when FAM goes to RT, they're going to get an amazing employee. But yes, guess what? The Convo Couch will still be rocking. We'll still be here because of you guys. And we won't stop because of you guys. We love you. FAM, anything else?
No, FAMs, thank you so much for your support. And, keep supporting independent journalists like Vanessa, like all those people that are on the ground. And, you're the reason we do what we do. So thank you.
And remember, fam, it's always appreciated on the couch.
Fam, you had to ruin the moment by... Yeah.
It's always appreciated.
Ruining moments.
Pasta Jardula.
From Fee.
And Oz with the pink shirt, the visor, and the fake hair. We love them.
Combo out. Bye, guys.
Bye.
See you Friday.